and whether we have reciprocity with nature and whether we have reciprocity with each other. The problem then when you get a redistribution situation is you can sometimes get somebody who's like, well, I've got everything here in my basket and I'm going to decide who needs what. Now, when my grandma was a farm woman out in Wisconsin, it was always the ladies' aid who told the pastors where to redistribute the wealth, you know, because they knew the women were out in the community. They knew who was ill. They knew who was just going to have a baby. They knew who, just everything, all of those pieces. And so when we get an imbalance of this redistribution, we get situations like what we have in our own economy now, where there's this kind of a big bubble, and instead of sort of counting on others to redistribute, we have to make laws about it, and we have to sort of force people to redistribute things, and that is a sign to me that there's an imbalance of massive proportions. There are Nauthies everywhere, and nobody is coming together to hold each other and to Manheim. Those kind of things that we would think we would take for granted, you know, that, well, of course, if people are in trouble with help and those kind of things, aren't always things that are clearly obvious when you're born. They are things that you get taught by example, by how is it being done. And it's also things that you put pressure on each other in a culture to do, to maintain those kinds of attitudes. There's in Australia, there's a reciprocity culture that they talk about. You don't say thank you to people who give you things, because that might embarrass the person, you know, and it might you don't, you know. So he says, this guy says, well, I got the biggest, fattest ox, and I'm gonna you know, slaughter it for this group of people who I've been living with and learning from. And obviously he didn't learn enough, because they all said, it was an okay ox. He's like, but it was the fattest one in the village. And they're like, yeah, well, it was okay. It was, you know, not bad. And he was very confused, and he says, well, to the elder, doesn't anyone recognize that this is like a really, you know, great deed here? And he says, well, if we recognize that, you know, that, it would be putting ourselves down and putting you up. And as soon as you do that, then somebody starts getting big-headed. Like, okay, well, it seems so strange to us, because we're taught to say thank you and all that kind of stuff all the time. But it makes sense in many ways, that the expectation of reciprocity isn't there. We shouldn't have expectations in reciprocity that we will be even acknowledged for our gifts, because it's enough to acknowledge it in your own self. And here's where sometimes I think that Nauthies plays out most, is in the relationship of self to self. When we are not in Gifu within ourselves, that's when we are needy for attention, or needy for, you know, whatever it is. There's a need within ourselves. And so how do we get in Gifu with ourselves? How do we get in Gifu? And one of my favorite things that I reminded my little sister, who was constantly in Nauthies, because she was always giving, and never receiving, and never asking for anything, and not taking time for herself. And she would get exhausted. She had mono so many times, I'll tell you. And I said, you know, don't forget that the message of that little baby that was born, you know, that we celebrate today, that you have to love your neighbor as yourself. and if you aren't loving yourself, then you've got nothing real to give to your neighbor. Everything you give will have need attached to it. You have to come into a gifu with yourself. You have to come into that balance and acknowledge that you have needs, that you need to sleep. You can't just be running after this friend or that friend and doing for everyone. You have to also get your sleep. You have to get your food. You have to balance out your finances. You have to be gifu, or you can't be on the stav end of any manas, of any community effort. So, did you have a question?
Could you put the speaker or the mic right in the center? We'll get a better pickup that way.
Okay.
Thank you.
How's that? You like that? Okay. Yeah. So I think sometimes as parents, especially, we have to be remembering that as community activists, we have to be remembering that piece. In our political leaders, it's important for us to look for people who are in gifu with themselves and not needy, because they will only be able to make policies that are based on a fear of lack or neediness. So, of course, this is a gifting time of year. And so one of the most important gifts that we can give ourselves is the enough food and rest, and there's this joyfulness that we can summon up. And the joyfulness rune, wunyo, is like, it kind of goes like this, where it's like a P, only pointy. And joy is, in Norse tradition, a very interesting balance between humility and pride. There's this sense of, I can't believe I did that. I did that? I can't believe I did that. I did that. I can't believe I did that. It's that job well done where you're just stunned that you were able to summon up this gift, the gifts that you have. You've summoned it up and you've been able to give, and it's been in balance. And that's where that bliss, that joy kind of comes in. And then you are in gifu with yourself, is when you have that wunyo, that joyfulness. Wunyo is also, if you look at that manas rune, again, you see it's two wunyos kind of kissing each other. Joy that comes together and just goes, yeah, we can do this. We can do this. I can't believe we can do this. Yeah, but we can. And it's that excitement and that filled with gratitude, but also pride, but also humility that we can get into and have that joy. When we have places like Lake Harriet, we have a very interesting and amazing sort of delicate dance between all of these topics, all of these concepts. We have spirituality that is redistributive. People give of their own joyful spirit, and it makes this amazing collection. That is to me a spiritual community that is tied into a folk way, and a spiritual community has those traditions that continue to create those bonds, those going out to eat, things, and those traditions of the kids, in their kids' circle, and these different things. And so those pieces create that spirituality, and it's not a redistributive kind of church environment where somebody's got the spirit and then doles it out kind of thing. It's that everybody is in Gifu with themselves, with the spirit, and with each other. And that's what makes this one of the most special places that I've ever been privileged to come and share my work in. So I thank you so much for that, and not in a way that I want to put you down. So I kind of wanted to open it up for questions to you. Are there things that you're just aching to know? Anything that you're thinking about? And I can give you my Wolvas perspective on.
Yeah, I guess what's the rune for beginnings? And how does that fit into?
The rune for beginnings, yes, because we're coming up on New Year, aren't we? Of course, we've got the ice rune, which is the straight staff, and I think that's interesting because in Norse tradition, ice is kind of one of the elements of creation. Ice and fire came together to create the universe, you see. And once the ice and fire comes together, have you ever seen a big ice and fire dance? Oh my land, it's really interesting. You put one of those old Weber grills out and put it on the ground in the middle of winter, and you light a fire in there, and pretty soon you've got ice fingers just kind of, the ice is melting and it's moving towards the fire, and there's this beautiful sound. And so it's in the stav that we find this ice and fire coming together, Isa and Nauthis. And we stand in Gnungagap, the gaping void, which is everything and nothing all at once. And we start to make the sounds of ice and fire coming together. And so then we look towards the birch trees. The birch trees on the northern hemisphere have always been the sacred tree of new beginnings because they're the first ones to bud out. And they are very medicinal. And they are also the standing dead. Even when a birch tree has died, it stands tall and is useful. And I think that's usefulness is important in Norse tradition. And so we've got some little dancing going on here. So when we start to sing those runes, Isa, Isa, now Isa, now Isa, now Isa, Beyorkana, Beyorkana, Beyorkana. And this is how we kind of create that energy or generate the energy to create that new piece. So we can call up from Gnungagap that which we wish to create for the new piece of the new world. Now, I think I mentioned Ragnarok in my little blurb. That was another one. My husband's like, "You're going to talk about Ragnarok on Christmas?" Like, well, in many ways, this is sort of the story because it's the death of the old world, the death of the old ways. Here we've got this little living life who's going to come into the world and model this behavior that we hope that we are brave enough to emulate. So that even then, in the midst of death and torture, he says, forgive them, they don't know what they're doing. They're ignorant and they don't get it, and I'm going to just forgive. And this compassion piece, this compassion is this reciprocation, is the giving of everything that we can. And so, yes, I'm going to talk about Ragnarok.